Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kyle Derby. I'm the research coordinator for the Chesapeake Bay near. Otter Point Creek is one of our components. And it is my pleasure today to introduce our 2022 summer intern, Faith McCarthy. Faith did an excellent job this summer doing a pre-construction assessment of the Haha Creek Mudflat out there, including actually finding some pretty interesting results that I'm excited to see her present to everybody today. She's a sophomore at Johns Hopkins University with a double major in environmental science and planetary science. So she was able to find this internship through the OPCA posting. So my pleasure to present and give it away.
Thank you very much, Kyle. So as you so eloquently said, I am Faith. I was the research intern for OPCA this past summer. And I'm going to get into a little bit of what I did. It was a pre-construction assessment of the wetland vegetation in the Haha Creek Mudflat. That's a lot of words. I looked at plants for the summer. It was a lot of fun. So before I get into the nitty-gritty, let's talk about me a little bit briefly. So here I am on a very hot day out in the Otter Point Creek, looking very sweaty with my canoe and my waders. So yep, as Kyle said, I'm studying at Johns Hopkins. I'm actually from the Eastern Shore. I'm from Centerville, so I'm no stranger to some marsh. And I had a wonderful time this summer out in the creek, getting muddy. So the star of our show here is this adorable little plant known as Sagittaria spatulata, subspecies spongiosa, more commonly known as the spongy arrowhead. It's got a fun little name for a fun little plant. And the interesting thing about this guy is that it's considered a state rare / imperiled species, as considered by the DNR. So this piqued my interest in that I was wondering, what does the presence of this plant mean in the broader ecosystem of the Haha Creek? And as we're all aware, there is a pretty substantial development site upstream of the Haha Creek. They've been making progress on it as of this summer. So I was wondering, could that upstream development threaten this ecosystem that is home to a state rare plant? A little bit more about our spongiosa. So the state rare classification essentially means that it's at risk of extirpation and or extinction. So there's only really a handful of existing populations in the state. One happens to be right outside this building, just a canoe ride away. And one thing about species like this is that they're not tolerant to disturbances, namely anthropogenic disturbances. So potential threats include development adjacent to a population, which could result in habitat changing. So that could be anything from sedimentation to introduction of contaminants, all kinds of things, all kinds of implications of development. So I got thinking about this at the beginning of the summer and kind of formulated an approach as seen here. So what I wanted to do first was gather up all of the legacy data. So this historical data came from my friends at the Chesapeake Bay Estuarine Research Reserve, including Kyle. They have more than a decade of vegetation data from all around Otter Point Creek, including some transects over at the Haha Mudflat. So I was focusing on those, clean up that data. And then as far as present day, I wanted to do my own, collect my own vegetation data around the Haha Mudflat using their same techniques. So just kind of honing in on that Haha Creek, which is being threatened by the development. I wanted to put all that data into a standardized formula for ecological health. So I use what's known as the Floristic Quality Assessment Index, which is kind of a neat way to gauge how healthy an ecosystem is. And I wanted to identify any trends over time. So it went all the way back to 2008 up to this data I collected this summer. And then as a bit of an offshoot, I also did some GIS work, geographic information systems, so mapping. I wanted to calculate past and future deforestation within the Haha watershed, just looking at commercial and residential development surrounding the creek. All right, so let's get into the data collection and analysis from the past to the present. So a little bit about the Floristic Quality Assessment Index. I'll refer to it as FQAI moving forward. It's kind of a mouthful. It's a tool used by government agencies and conservation organizations to analyze the ecological value of an area based on its plant species composition. So to put that in simpler terms, it's kind of like it's on the basis that every plant species has a different level of tolerance to change. So for example, maybe an invasive non-native species like English ivy, it's going to get a value of 0 because it's very tolerant to change, it's invasive. Whereas our little Spongiosa is going to get a 10 because it's more sensitive and requires more of a niche within the ecosystem. So, like I said, every species is going to get a different what's known as a C value from -5 up to 10. So -5 is highly invasive, maybe non-native species, whereas a rank of 10 are plants that exhibit a high degree of fidelity and require high quality communities. And again, they're typically intolerant of anthropogenic disturbance. I actually used a standard outside of Northern Virginia, a study from DeBerry. This was kind of my reference study in terms of assigning every species a rank. And then that gets put into this formula. I inputted the historical EV data and then the present EV data. And again, that C value represents the ecological significance of the species. Boring. So now the fun stuff. Here is a little snapshot of me and Kyle out in the field. So essentially the strategy was to use a spokes on a wheel design to collect vegetation data. So from a central point, we used a random number generator to decide how far to go and in what direction to go. And then when we got that point on the map, we put down this little quadrat of PVC pipes and, documented every species within that quadrat. So some tedious work, but definitely necessary. And as we can see over here, this is a whole bed of our Spongiosa that's actually in bloom here. So looking very cute. And of course, we had to make sure not to step on those. That was the challenge. We don't want to step on the rare plant. So yes, again, this data was entered into the FQAI to compare to any historic data from this area. All right, getting into the deforestation aspect of the study. Here is what I consider to be the Haha Creek watershed. So here it is. This is the mouth of the Haha where our mudflat was. And this watershed is kind of flanked by, I think, Abbey Road and Morton Road, and goes all the way up north of 95. So it's this nice little triangular watershed that's all feeding into what ends up being this alluvial fan out to the Otter Point Creek. So just some more visuals here. So the earliest good imagery I could find was from 1995. And then I had current imagery as well. You can see even just between these two, that central patch of forest has been pretty encroached upon. I think I threw in some little circles animations. Yeah. Here I focused on this residential development just north of Route 40, which hadn't existed 25 years ago. And then of course the commercial development up here, I believe that's like Wetlands and stuff, a lot of things getting put in, also encroaching upon the forest and the Haha Creek watershed. So I made a fun little interactive story map using ArcGIS. That can just give us some visuals of the Haha Creek watershed and land use change over time. This actually, I'll show the QR code again, but you can scan it and use these sliders for yourself and check it out. It's kind of fun, but also a little bit depressing. So yeah, here's our recent imagery, more about the boundaries. This was the oldest imagery I could find, 1995. That was 8 years before I was born. So here's our first slider. Here we have 1995. And then we can use the slider going 10 years forward into 2005. You can see some progress. You can see some bare land as these housing developments go in, as the commercial development goes in. And yeah, you can just kind of visually see big chunks of this forest being kind of eaten at by different developments. And then another jump, another 10 years jump from 05 to 2015. We can see an expansion of those same developments. Yeah, namely here, more houses put in, an expansion of that business park up there. Not fun. And then I think finally, oh yes, this was some data I found. I believe it was from some state agency, the DNR, about land use. In green is what's considered to be healthy forest. And then shades of orange, yellow, brown are all developments, residential or commercial. So yeah, again, you can see down here is a lot of change. I'm gonna slide that again. Whereas the forest used to expand, yeah, pretty extensively down to the water. And then finally, 1995 was today. We can slide and see huge swaths of forest getting clear cut. 27 years of development right here, yeah. You can see it's kind of getting inward and closer to the creek and closer to that central patch that has yet to be touched until now, of course. Okay, so how about that planned Avenue Business Park? Here is some progress as of July 2022. So, you know, ironically behind it, you can see that housing development. And then, yeah, this is just clear cutting that they're doing. And then in the distance, you can see Otter Point Creek. Here are the actual plans for said development. This dotted line represents what they want to essentially clear cut and replace with warehouses, parking lots, all kinds of wonderful impervious surfaces. And just another slider. I really like my sliders.
Great visuals.
That is all gonna go. Yeah, that's and as we can see, that's kind of what's left of the continuous forest cover. And they just want to take advantage of that unused land. This you don't have to play, but this was essentially how I did my measuring. I considered continuous forest to be at least 3 acres of forest cover uninterrupted. So I took my measure tool on ArcGIS and I just measured out all of these little patches of forest, dodging, you know, neighborhoods, dodging roads, developments. And I did that a whole bunch of times to make sure it was accurate. And at the end of it all, 27 years ago, there were a little over 1,000 acres of forest cover enclosed by Route 24, Avenue Road, and Singer Road in the north. Since then, just under 200 acres have been clear cut or fragmented for development. So this means that the upcoming Avenue Business Park project will be the largest forest clearing event in probably 30 years, resulting in a loss of 300 acres of forest cover, which is unprecedented, and its effects on the surrounding ecosystems it's hard to tell. But yeah, so I wanted to get a baseline of our healthy ecosystem at the Haha Mudflat before any of these changes really had an impact. This is really grim, sorry. Yeah, again, if you want to take a look at that story map for yourself, there's a QR code and I'll show it again. All right, getting into our results, conclusion, discussion stuff, looking at some graphs. I'm sure you're thrilled. So the score over time was pretty consistent. There were some fluctuations in the past decade and a half. And it was considered to be a healthy ecosystem by this standard. It's really good to see that over time there haven't been, crazy fluctuations, and I would say that's because it's been a relatively stable ecosystem since then. And of course, when you remove the state rare species from this calculation, it brings down the ecosystem health significantly. Again, those are kind of indicator species that tell us, this is a special ecosystem in some way. And like I said, the data from this past summer matched historical trends from SIVNR's data. I wanted to make a note on species richness, which is another measure of ecosystem health. It's not really reliable because it doesn't take into account those invasive, tolerant, or sensitive species. And that's what I liked about the floristic quality assessment, is that every species has a weight in the calculation. Whereas with the species richness formula, it's like, a plot of 100 invasive species is going to have the same consideration as a plot of 100 rare species. So that changes a little bit more over time. But if you go back to the floristic quality graph, it's more unstabilized because of the presence of some more robust species. Don't be fooled. So exciting news, finally some good news for the Haha Creek, and a little bit of bad news. But so we recorded what's known as Sagittaria engelmanniana, or Engelmann's arrowhead. It hasn't been recorded in this plot since at least 2008. And not only is this a state rare species, but it's considered highly threatened by the DNR. So if anything, it's more protected than Spongiosa. So here's a picture of that guy. He's got this again. So Sagittaria, meaning like an arrow. That was very exciting to find, but less exciting was Microstygium, known as Japanese silkgrass. This was a new invasive for the plot. Hadn't really been seen before around the Haha Creek. So whether that means, anthropogenic effects are causing it, it's hard to say. But the presence of the engelmanniana was really exciting, and just further supported the fact that this ecosystem is really special. And they both heavily influenced the FQA score, with the engelmanniana having a C value of 10 and rubidium -5. And conclusions. Here's a picture of me and Becky out in the field, marsh. Hey, I like that picture. Go back. Can you tell us what the temperature was? 90s. Every time I went out, it was 90s. And there's a storm on the horizon somewhere every time. And the humidity is, the plants breathe on you. The plants, yeah. But we're smiling nonetheless. So some final points. As mentioned, the business park is to be the largest forest clearing event. Well, sorry. The business park is the largest forest clearing event surrounding the Haha Creek in at least 30 years at 300 acres. It's a huge, huge development. Multiple studies have shown that impervious surfaces in a watershed such as this, rooftops, parking lots, are related to degraded water quality, with runoff, contaminants, all kinds of pH changes. It can have a number of unforeseen effects or foreseen effects. Introduction of land use change upstream has been linked to loss of biodiversity. This development could degrade wetland quality and threaten the populations of state rare species. And like I said, these species are analogous to a canary in a coal mine. If something changes, they're going to go first. If their population starts to decline, that has implications for everything else in the community. So it's important to keep an eye on these state rare plants as development is continued. Special thanks again to Kyle and Becky from SIVNR, as well as the volunteers from AFLEC, Kathy Baker-Brosh, and Lauren Peltonthong. They were immense supports for me. This was actually my first real kind of fieldwork experience. you know, as a college student, I read a lot of papers and reports about stuff like this, but this was my first time actually being part of it and getting out in the field. So they showed me the ropes. They taught me how to walk around in a marsh like that without falling and getting a mouthful of mud. But that I only did only once. So huge thanks to those guys and for letting me walk around in the lobby in muddy waders. You know, I can't thank you enough. And a glimmer of hope, light at the end of the tunnel here, are some recent updates on the development. So local executives have actually ordered a halt in progress, pending review of the permits of this construction of these developments. And they actually mentioned in their statement environmental concerns. So I would consider this to be a pretty big win for the community. I'm sure a lot of you have stakes in this. I know Kathy was very vocal in the Save Abingdon Woods community movement. And I think that a lot of really great progress has been made there. And I can only hope that these developers take that into consideration in rewriting their forest conservation plans. And, you know, I think this could have a really good effect down the road. And again, there's my story map, if you want to check that out. And to conclude, I think that, you know, this work is even more effective if it's compounded on. I'm hoping that this can be the baseline, and then as development continues, we can continue to monitor changes and take into account those state rare species, because they're going to go first if anything's going to go. And I'm going to open up to questions now. If anybody has any questions about methods, conclusions, anything, I'm happy to talk. So, thank you all.
Where does the Haha Creek enter into the Otter Creek? Go right into it?
Yeah, so it flows in through a mudflat. So that's kind of where I was focused, vegetation-wise, was that mudflat, where the creek meets the Otter Point Creek. Yeah. Yes.
How did you decide to choose these venues? Did you throw in knowing that you wanted to look for that plant, or did you look and then find in this?
Yeah, so the Spongiosa was kind of like my impetus of, okay, this is something about this ecosystem is robust and we need to go check it out. The Engelmanniana, I just kind of found along the way, which was pretty exciting to see another state rare growing alongside the Spongiosa, which isn't a coincidence.
So
Yes.
what is your suggestion for future research?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that monitoring what Sibner does is fantastic. They do emergent vegetation surveys every other summer, I believe, and that's very intensive. So it is ongoing research to get an idea of what's growing there, what we're losing, what we're gaining. So it is.
I also have a question, how do you get there? We go out there all the time,
Yeah.
but we avoid it.
Yeah, so it's from the launch, it's kind of a straight shot across the creek.
And then
And you have to enter into kind of like a wetland.
You take the main channel up,
Yeah,
and then you can actually, I think all of it.
there were times that we had to drag the canoe
Yeah.
through some mud.
absolutely.
It's rarely that high.
Right,
First day we went out there.
The tide's really high then, you might miss some.
Yeah, you know.
precisely. So you gotta kind of measure like, oh, am I gonna go on the rising tide versus the falling tide? You don't want to get eaten by snakeheads while you're out there. That was a concern for sure.
Or then it is stay at night, just till the tide.
Yep, that was talked about that a couple times. Yeah.
Did you see any influences of like any impacts from the construction?
So, I mean, there was just, there was pollution overall, like you see in any kind of estuary around the Chesapeake. But not notable sedimentation that I saw changes, like after rainfall, I didn't notice any like significant, like you could get really turbid or anything. So, yeah, I didn't see much change from the construction, but of course there are boat litter and whatnot, fishing line.
So when you monitored this, were they during construction?
Yeah, so at the beginning of the summer, I think they hadn't quite started clear cutting. It was more into midsummer when they started. I think I showed the aerial footage. That was like July. So when I first started was right before the project had begun.
Okay, thank you.
But those other populations, are they in nice places or are they
So-
under threat?
Outside of the Haha
Yeah, you
Mudflat?
said about 20 different.
Yeah, so I was looking at the Mudflat first because that was the first population that's gonna be affected by change. But there are a number of populations outside of the Haha Creek as well. They're just really, really concentrated there for some reason. They like it a lot. So that's what I was focused on it.
But are they under threat where they are? Because other populations.
They are, I mean, inevitably, any runoff from the construction is gonna make its way into the Otter Point Creek and beyond, so, the mudflat is just gonna probably feel the effects first. And have the most significant effects being closer.
Where did you say the mudflat is?
Sorry,
How big is the mudflat?
oh, maybe a square acre, yeah, it's,
Stops.
yeah. It's square acre too.
There's a question from the virtual group.
Yeah.
So Jen from Seedner wants to say, great presentation. We are looking forward to meeting with DNR's environmental review to see how your data can be incorporated into RTE data layers. Have you thought about other audiences to share this information?
Oh, yeah, I would love if my work could be, I mean, I know Kathy used it a little bit, for some of the legislation, but yeah, absolutely. I'd love to expand on it.
Good question. Yeah, in your data, something happened in 2012.
Yeah, I was curious about, there was a little spike in diversity, and there are so many factors, it's hard to say, you know, maybe it was a good year for rain or something about the conditions was ideal there. I couldn't exactly trace it. But relatively though, it was pretty stable over time. There wasn't much of a standard deviation, with the forest quality. Yeah,
And
sorry, go ahead.
And as far as historical data,
Mhm.
there are GIS layers available through Harford County that can take you back.
Yeah, yes. So I just used Signers because I was using their techniques. I don't know exactly what vegetation sampling techniques they used back then.
No sampling techniques, I'm just saying,
Just the data.
just your aerial imagery that you could use for your story map.
Mhm. Right, if that's publicly available, yes, it could be layered onto that, sure. Thank you. Yes.
I was just curious, did you look at any other parameters within the Haha Creek in terms of the water or pH, anything in the sediment or soil, any physical chemical parameters, and
Right.
if those had changed as well, or if that stability was because the ecosystem
Mhm.
also was really stable, so you can at least establish a baseline for
Right.
potential change.
So the only consistent data that I had available to me was vegetation, and that's what I wanted to expand on. If there had been anything for, you know, salinity, pH, substrate, that would have been great. But there was nothing to compare to. But that's something that I believe fully moving forward, that should be monitored in any way. It's hard to have like a continuous monitoring device for Hartford, you know, maintenance and upkeep, but I think it would be absolutely worth it.
Kathy wanted to add in.
She said, not a question, just a statement, that she used some of Faith's data to support Haha Branch Tidal Marsh to gain habitat of local significance, a special critical areas designation that will give it more protection. So there's more meetings with planning and zoning to work toward this designation. She said, thank you, Faith, for your work on Haha.
Thank you, Kathy. That was so exciting to hear that this data is getting into the hands of people that are making these big decisions. And I thank Kathy for kind of being the middleman and communicating everything. So shout out Kathy for sure. Other questions? Ask away. Anybody want to know how to walk into the marsh without falling on your face? Anybody want to try it?
I always needs volunteers.
Sorry, yeah. There's always looking for volunteers.
Volunteers. I mean, yeah, I'm sure they would love to have you guys volunteer and go out and do vegetation surveys. Yeah.
Is Signer through this place, or I'm not sure what that is.
Kyle can answer. They have a number of locations.
Yes, so I'm a Maryland Department of Natural Resources. So the National Estuary Research Reserve programs will program 30 sites across the country, and each one of those sites is administered by a state. So the Maryland Reserve is a dividing component, and this component of the reserve is part of Harvard County Parks Recreation. So Otter Point Creek is our site partner. So each reserve does the same type of monitoring. We all do vegetation, we do wetland elevation, water quality, the same way across all the reserves. So theoretically, you can compare the Puerto Rico data with the Alaska data, even though there wouldn't be much of a comparison. There's no difference. So, so we leverage those data sets as like a living laboratory. We look at change across the entire country. And we support this internship effort to answer some more site-specific needs that they have up here in other country. The current for 2023, the internship application period is open right now. A couple of suggested comments for 6.
Yes.
6 noms up there right now. So whenever Faith was talking about senior and senior data, we go out every 2 years and we measure long-term trend sets. So that legacy data is really only constrained to 2 or 3 plots that we repeatedly sample. So
So this year, all transitions.
OPCA.
Oh, okay.
yeah.
I know what always on SED ones. So it seemed like the water longer in there were videos.
So you can visit the website, otterpointcreek.org, and there's an option to click on volunteer, and there'll be some information on what you can volunteer on for different things. So yeah. Sarah Grace McCarthy has something she wants to add. Okay. Wonderful presentation, Faith. Do you think citizen science using iNaturalist, etc., could help support plant species ID and mapping in the future?
Absolutely. I'm a huge proponent of iNaturalist. If anybody is unfamiliar, it's a great little app where you can go and enter plant species that you found and help you identify them as well. I used it a couple times in the field and cheated. But yeah, it's a great tool. And I think it also has a GIS aspect to it too. So that's another kind of layer that we can put on top of the Haha Creek watershed.
It's a plug for that technology volunteer opportunity we have going on here. So we have volunteers that go out in the summertime. It's a program that Christy runs back there. And they go out and monitor plants along certain spots, correct? Over time. But as you're out there, you can, if you have time, be able to monitor other plants as well using iNaturalist. And you will upload it on Project First, right? Okay. But if you love plants, there's another opportunity for people to get involved, right?
There are so many ways, like Alice said, there's, you can do iNaturalist, you can volunteer with the OPCA doing the long-term vegetation concepts. I don't know, get on their mailing list, you know, they communicate it.
And then Bree Martin has a comment. She said, excellent work explaining the change in land use over time and the scale of the impact that we will likely see from the business park. This is important work. I wonder if some information, hold on, I gotta scroll, could be distilled into a 2 to 3 minute video that can be shared easily, provided on relevant websites. So yeah, that's a great comment.
YouTube, like that BioLice. Yeah, for sure. A lot of it was just kind of figures and numbers, but it could definitely be more snack sized. And I'd love to do that.
Yeah. That's a good idea, everybody. Thank you.
That all my questions? Fantastic. Thank you guys so much for listening. A great time, and I highly encourage you to get out there in that march and check it out for yourself. It's beautiful.
Yes.
Thank you.